Christy Morgan, and I'm a user experience designer at InterWorks. And what that means is basically that I get to explore the worlds of clients' data every day and help them create the most intuitive path through that data, really in the context of dashboards. I've been with InterWorks for about 2 years, and this is work that I'm really passionate about doing because I believe if we combine empathy and creativity, that we can create the best and most intuitive experiences for people with every single dashboard. So that's what we're here to talk about today, and I'd love to share my insight as a designer here into what that means. What makes a dashboard great? What makes it really successful? So the short answer is a lot of different things. Obviously there are countless things we could talk about, but where I always like to begin is this quote, which I personally like to keep on a Post-it note on my desk just to kind of ground me and bring me back to really the purpose of what I'm doing every single day. And this quote is, "The shortest distance between two people is great design." So what does that mean in the context of dashboards? I think it means this, that just because the data is complex and you might have a really crazy and elaborate set of data, it doesn't mean that the user's journey through that data has to be. So just like this illustration shows, kind of in an abstract way, you don't need to create a maze for people to follow or try to follow and make it really crazy and I need to put every single thing in front of them all at one time, because when you do that, you kind of give people this feeling of the spinning beach ball of doom. Or maybe if you're a PC user, it's this, just loading, what am I looking at here? And ultimately, when you set out with the purpose of giving people all the information, you make the cognitive load so large that they actually retain none of it. So it's not at all accomplishing what you set out to, and that's really frustrating for you and for the user. So how do we not do that, you might be thinking? And you end up at this screen, just an empty Tableau screen. And if you're anything like me, the first time you open something like this up, you feel really overwhelmed. You know, you're like, this is a blank canvas. I don't know how to begin, where to put pencil to paper. What does that look like for me? I don't know what I should do here. So at InterWorks and within my team, we really like to use this analogy that building a dashboard is like building a house. And that helps us to really break it down piece by piece and understand what goes into the dashboard so that when we're staring at that blank canvas, we have a beginning point to jump in. So what does that look like? What are the design parallels between building a dashboard and building a house? Well, it's these things, these 4 points that we're going to break down as we go. So the first one is you are the architect. So essentially, you're the one that's in control, you're making the decisions, and you can do it really methodically and strategically. And the second thing is it starts with a blueprint, because every structure needs a plan. So it's something to come back to. And thirdly, considering your guests is crucial. So really keeping the user at the center of what you're doing and making sure that every decision you're making is keeping them at the center and making sure their needs are met functionally. The last thing is it takes collaboration. So just within InterWorks, we have so many different teams, whether it's data architects or analysts, designers, consultants, and really working together and bringing each of our different skill sets and expertise, we can create the best solution. So it's not just one person, it's everybody together creating the best of the best. So just to dive a little deeper and jump into each one of these points, we start with you are the architect. So just like I said before, that means that you're in control and you're the one who is really creating the structure, creating all of the functionalities. So what it means to be an architect is to think like an architect or to think like a designer. And as a designer, I would love to share with you this process of design thinking. So this isn't something that I created, it's not something InterWorks created. This is a well-known process that many people across the world really use and kind of refer back to every single day to help them work through the design process. So here are the steps. We're going to go through them one by one. It starts with empathizing, and what that means, just like with any context, when we think of empathy, it means putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So that means interviewing people, interviewing users who are going to be the ones actually walking through and interacting with your dashboards, and asking the right questions, really pointed questions to understand what it is that they need when they come to the dashboard. What insight are they trying to surface? What actions do they want to lead people to do next? Understanding really meaning make sure you're on the same page after you have that interview. Kind of mirror and relay back to them. This is what I'm saying, or this is what I'm hearing you say. Does that make sense to you? Is that what you're saying? And try to make sure you're aligned on everything. And then planning really moves you into the next step. And what are we going to do with this information next? So then we move into the ideate phase, which means that we should sketch and experiment and really iterate. It's an iterative process, so it's not all going to happen at one time or in one draft. Sketching is your best friend when it comes to dashboarding work, because lots of people like to tell me, I'm not an artist, I can't sketch, like that's not me. But in reality, when it comes to dashboards, you just have to be able to draw basic shapes, triangles and rectangles and boxes to represent big ideas. You don't have to be just Da Vinci to create the best dashboard sketch in the world. You're drawing boxes. So I think the beauty of sketching is that, and iterating through the process, is that you can crumple it up and throw it away. You don't feel so precious about all of your ideas and kind of married to them in the way that you would if you immediately jumped into Tableau and were trying to flesh everything out. So I think it's really, really important that people start with sketching. And then with that comes giving options. Seeing this slide here, you can see there's a variety of different bar charts even when we say just bar chart, there's so many ways we can do that with color, with size, with shape, and everything beyond. So I think giving options and being in this ideate phase means brainstorming, essentially. Moving into the next step, it's prototyping. So it's essentially just taking that ideation phase and that brainstorming phase and moving it into a more high fidelity stage, upgrading your sketches and refining it all to make it more beautiful and closer to that end product. And then you take that prototype and you put it in front of people. And that's where the test phase comes in. You're watching how people interact with it and seeing what their behaviors are. Is it an expected behavior, or are they doing something that you weren't expecting? And then you collect feedback, you ask more questions, and you iterate through and work on your prototype and kind of refine it further to say, okay, they actually interacted in this way and that's not what I was intending, but that gives me some new insight to work with. So now I can create a better version of the prototype. And then finally that leads us to the implementation phase. So it means handing it off for example, from designer to developer or whatever you may be, and really trying to start building it. Moving into the phase of you're ensuring success and you're putting it out into the world because it's ready to be finalized and put out there. So that is basically how you think like an architect and what it means to use the design thinking process. Next, we move into phase number 2. It starts with a blueprint. And as I said before, any structure deserves a plan and requires a plan if you want to do it well. So this kind of blueprint here, as you can see, this is something that I basically wireframed from a project I was working on, and it's, again, just a sketch. It's just boxes to show what this dashboard could look like, what things could go where. It doesn't even have chart titles yet because you don't even need to jump into that deep into the weeds section until you're ready. You can start with just boxes and placement of things based on the hierarchy, and that leads us into these design principles. So there are a lot of design principles in the world of design, but these are 5 that we always come back to and that I use every single day in the job in my position at InterWorks. It's really, really helpful to have these to refer to and remind myself, like, these things will make the product great at the end of the day. So firstly, we have hierarchy. Hierarchy is the relationship between elements. So as you can see in this illustration, you've got primary, secondary, and tertiary and beyond information. And having those layers of separation and using basically different visual language to communicate those layers to your user will help them understand how to navigate through the information. And instead of feeling like everything carries the same visual weight, they can understand that this is where I need to look first because this is clearly the most important piece of information. And so I will always start there. And then giving them the second, third, and fourth and beyond steps to follow after that. So this example of this dashboard shows you just that concept, hierarchy. So you know when you see this very large and bold text that says amount raised, that's where you're looking first. You know, there's high contrast, it's really large, it's bold. That gives you, these are all the visual language and the pieces that help you to cue to your user. This is where you begin. This is the most important piece. And then underneath that, where I have the next arrow, is the 1 hour and 45 minutes. So again, contrast and size, these are all things that play into giving people the information they need to know where to begin and where to move next. Beyond that is consistency. So when you look at this kind of abstraction of information here, we can see there's a lot of different disparate parts, and it's hard to kind of parse out, like, what am I looking at, and are these things meant to be similar, or are they meant to feel different? I don't really know. There's not distinguishable patterns. So consistency is really the process of creating patterns for people in order to help them understand how things are connected or disparate. So when we look at this versus when we look at this, we can tell that there's consistency here. Again, there's patterns to give people the indication of, oh, this, when I see this type of text in this size and this weight, it's always a chart title. That's always the same placement, the same color. All of these different things are patterns that people can follow, and it helps people navigate through all of the elements on your dashboard. So this is an example of an actual dashboard and shows you exactly that. So the chart titles, the way that they're in all caps, the way that they're in the same size and the same weight of font, that is the consistency we're looking for here. And even I have here the second arrow showing that your axes are aligned, and that consistency is really helpful for people when they're looking from one chart to the next to understand, okay, this is how this is measured. These are how these things compare and contrast. And then even the weight and the size of those fonts on the chart, because you don't want to feel like this chart's got some really large numbers and this one's got really small. Is there a reason for that? People are going to assign meaning to things if you don't assign it for them. So being sure that you're being strategic and intentional about the consistent use of everything on your dashboard is super key. So the next thing that we want to talk about is scale. And when we talk about scale, it's not just the size and the dimensions of different objects in your dashboard, it's also the visual weight that those elements carry. So when we look at these circles here, we can see they all carry a similar visual weight, or the same visual weight, because they're all the same size, the same color, etc. And when we look at this example, we can tell, whoa, this one on the left really carries a lot more visual weight. And that's signifying to your user, this is something that I want you to look at first. It's more important, it carries the most weight here. Whereas these really small circles, they carry a lot less weight. So there's a lot less significance and a lot less value with those pieces of information than with the one on the left. And this is kind of an example of how you would see it more relevantly to the dashboard context. So you might see these 4 charts that all carry the same visual weight versus looking at this one on the right, this one chart that carries more visual weight because it's larger, it's taking up more space. So clearly there is more value and more significance to that chart. This is an example of a dashboard and how scale really plays into that. So looking at the boldness and the size and even the use of color here, you can tell this dashboard title and these KPIs are the most important things and the things that I want people to look at first. So that's how scale can kind of play into the actual dashboard. And then that moves us into white space, which is the space around and between elements. It's really important because when we see this, like this example here with these 2 rectangles, which could represent charts, you see the space that's happening between them and around them. And that space really indicates to the user these things are disparate parts or they're connected. And so when we think about white space, it's all about what is the relationship between these things. So then when we move them together like this, we can tell that these are connected. These are 2 things that I want you to compare and contrast and look at together with one another in tandem, not as separate pieces. So considering those things and considering the space will always create a better dashboard experience for your user. And then this is how you would see it in the context of specifically text and charts. So when we look at this example on the right, we can tell there's kind of a lot of tension that we feel with that, because all of this information kind of gets crunched into the corner. But instead, the experience we want people to have with our dashboards is like the example on the left, where we leave what we like to call a lot of breathing room around these elements. That makes people feel like what they're looking at is more balanced and overall just more visually pleasing and appealing to them. So that's how you would see it more in the context of a dashboard. Here we can see with these blue outlines, that spacing. You don't want that crunch, you want the breathing room. You want people to feel good about what they're looking at, feel comfortable in the space that you're putting them in. So this is how it would be in the context of a dashboard again. It might be more helpful for you to see an example like this and see, okay, if I leave my KPIs like this at the top, if I leave this breathing room around them, maybe I don't even need to give them a background like these charts have with the white background. It's giving more space and more room for things to live within your dashboard. So that's important. And then also just considering, again, with consistency, you know, the spacing that you leave between all of the charts to, again, make them feel connected or separate. Those are all considerations you should be thinking through when you're making decisions about your dashboard. So then we move into considering your guests. So just like you would with your home and considering someone coming over to your home, you should consider who is coming to your dashboard, who is your audience, and what are they looking for when they come. These are examples of houses, and in the same way that we need to put things in front of our users and our audience, and for me, clients, to show them, this is what I'm thinking you're saying, and is this what you're looking for? You know, we have these house examples to say, like, it could be like this, it could be like that. You know, there's an entire world of possibility when it comes to dashboards. So putting things in front of people to see what it is and kind of gauge what they're really looking for can be so helpful. And this is kind of how that can look in terms of dashboards. These different colors, different, you know, charts and how we use outlines or we don't use outlines, things like that. These are all really important. And when it comes to considering your guests, you have to keep in mind accessibility. So making sure that the data is accessible to everyone, whether they're the CEO or they're the newest employee of the company. You want them to feel like they are welcome and that they can understand easily what information you're trying to get across to them. And adding things like subtitles to your charts, or making sure that you're intentionally giving like tooltips and hovers for things that are categorized by color for people that might be colorblind, for instance. These are all accessibility points that are important to think about when you're in the context of a dashboard. So the final point is that collaboration is key. So really, building a dashboard, just like building a house, takes a team. When we think about building a house, it's not all on the architect. There are plumbers and electricians and there are construction workers that all come together and they bring their different skill sets and their different expertise to the table, and that makes the house beautiful and it makes it functional. In the same way, we have to think about dashboards. So at InterWorks, we have data architects and analysts, consultants, designers, and all of those people coming together and bringing, again, that expertise to the table will ultimately create the best solution for the client, and everyone will benefit from that. So remembering that collaboration is key and that you don't need to go it alone and be kind of a silo and everything will really help you to create the best of the best solutions. So you've got all the information and all these new tools that you can apply to your dashboard design, so we might be thinking, where do we go from here? Well, InterWorks is a great place to start. So if you want to check out more resources and learn about who we are and what we do and all of this information that I talked about today, check out InterWorks.com and check out our blog. We've got plenty of resources that you can really glean information from. And just to shamelessly plug one of my favorite products, is something that we really created here at InterWorks called Curator. So if a single dashboard is like a house, Curator is kind of the neighborhood where those houses can live. You can really customize and integrate and showcase all of your Tableau dashboards using Curator. So it's a great resource that I would recommend you check out. Yeah, so feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or comments about any of this. We'd love to chat with you. Thank you.